Irrigation Specialist for Alberta Agriculture and Irrigation, and I have been in that position for a number of years, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about our methods of soil moisture management. And it's interesting, I've been asked to speak on drought a few times this year, and they were anticipating a drought, and whenever you anticipate a drought, it seems that God has a different plan, and we get more rain than I've seen in a long time. If you know the Brooks area, last year we had 75 mils from April 1st all the way to September 30th. And within the first 3 weeks, from April 1st to May the 7th, I think we had 106 mils. So that just shows you the discrepancy between one year and the next. Anyway, without further ado, I will start here. So I got a phone call yesterday, and it's interesting the timing of the phone call. And there was an individual, he was asking me, he's a strawberry grower, and he asked, what kind of soil moisture sensors should I use? And he said, when I do a Google search, I found thousands and thousands and thousands of these things. And he said, I have no idea which ones are the best. And he said, I've been working through a subscription-based one out of the Netherlands, and he said, it's just not doing what I want it to do. And so today, I get to kind of elaborate on some of the answers that I gave him, and then answer whatever questions that you have for me. So the first thing I think I'd like to talk about is what conventionally most producers use. And I know I'm from the Rosemary area, just north of Brooks, and one of the producers there, I did one of these talks for the U of A, and he said, Len, you forgot to mention the tool that we use the most often. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, well, the shovel. He said, that's 90% of us use just a shovel. So I didn't bring a shovel. I do have it in my truck, but I didn't bring it out here. You all know what a shovel looks like. But most of them, if they don't use the shovel, they'll use what's called a Dutch auger, an Eigelkamp auger. And what they'll do is they'll go out in their field, and they'll auger down to whatever depth that their crop is rooting to, and then they'll test that soil moisture. And then what they do is just do a hand feel. And that hand feel method works well for most producers. And the reason it does, and I'll get to at the end, but it is probably the most reliable for them, and it's something that they can do to say, okay, yeah, I do have enough moisture, or it looks like I have enough moisture in my field for my crop to be working dead. Lost. Maybe I hit me. Was that better? Yep. I guess I'll just have to speak up.
No, it's working.
Now it's working. Okay.
It went from full to dead.
So this is one most people use if they're not using a shovel. And then the next one is what's called a back saver. And this back saver is just an oak field step-on sampler, and I can push it into the soil and step on it like this, and then I can reach all the way up, and then this comes up and I can go down 4 feet with it, okay? So that's your oak field step-on sampler. And so those are your physical, those are your more direct methods of irrigation management. I don't know what's going on here tonight.
Just have the new battery.
What's that?
Just putting in a new battery.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Try this one more time. Otherwise, you're going to have to deal with me yelling at you. Okay, so those are your direct, your physical methods of monitoring soil moisture. And then what we're going to get into is our plant-based methods. And I don't have them all here. I have a couple of different methods to monitor moisture. And so this is an indirect method. And this is what's called an IRT, or infrared thermometer. And what we can do is we can mount it on a pivot. I don't know if you can see our demo farm pivot over there, but they had a number of these mounted on. And then what you would have to do is you'd run your pivot dry because of the interference from the pivot itself, the soil moisture that was being applied through your pivot, okay, through irrigation. And that would attenuate the signal, and so you wouldn't get a good signal. So you'd have to run it around dry. So you could have a static position for this, but what it does is it gives you a small window of what your crop temperature is. And then we have an idea, based on that crop temperature, crop likes to be cool. If there's enough soil moisture there, it's cool enough. And then we have a baseline value for what that looks like. And if we go above or below that baseline value, we know we're either too wet or too dry. And if we're too dry, then we apply irrigation. Makes sense? Okay? So that's how this probe works. And then we use what's called a crop water stress index. So that crop water stress index is a part of this package that comes from Dynamax. And that crop water stress index is based on a time of year where they say, okay, here's what our crop looks like. It's given plenty of water, and it seems like it's growing well. And then there's a stress limit. There's a stress limit they set with this crop water stress index. And so once that stress limit is set, then we go out into the field and we monitor our leaf temperature, okay? But the problem with that is whenever I set that, it doesn't account for some of the variations that we have in wind and temperature and radiation, right? So if those things change over a period of time, then you're going to have a different baseline for your trigger, okay? So that's one of the issues that we have with the indirect measurement of an IRT. The other ones I have here are sap flow, and basically they put these on the trunk or a tiller or a stem of a plant, and it applies heat, and it applies a known amount of heat, so 1 to 5 degrees, and then after it's done that, then if the heat dissipates, then they can tell how much sap flow we have. The problem with that is it doesn't account for your radial transfer of heat. There's a variation with the radial transfer of heat within the plant, so it doesn't account for that. But it is a real-time value of your transpiration for your plant. So that's one other tool that you can use, and that's a plant-based tool. The next one we'll get into is our soil moisture tools. This one is a theta probe, and it's an FDR probe, which is a frequency domain probe. It's based on capacitance. This is a PR2 6 probe, and it is, again, it's a capacitance probe as well, and I'll get into what a capacitance means in a second, but I just want to show you the probes themselves. This one goes down, this is a profiling probe. It goes down into the soil. This is an access tube, this plastic tube here, and you can leave it in your soil, and then you can take this and you can put this into multiple locations, so you have an idea of what your profile looks like over multiple locations. And each one of these rings here, shows you what your capacitance looks like at that level. So what a capacitance probe does is it measures the dielectric content of your soil. And so your dielectric content is the amount of charge that a particular soil will hold, okay? So air, so that's what my dielectric content for air. Air will only hold a charge of 1, okay? And then water is 80. So that's the dielectric content for water. A mineral soil is about 4, organic matter is about 2 to 4. So when I'm looking at the soil, I know if there's a change in that amount of charge that it can hold, that capacitance is based on the soil moisture that I have in the soil, okay? So that's how we're measuring capacitance, as well as frequency domain. There's a couple other ones, just examples of that. This is a GS3 probe from Meter. This is a CX655 probe from Campbell Scientific, again based on the same kind of principle, that capacitance principle that I just talked about. And then lastly here I have a TDR probe. And this TDR is a long cable that we have. I think this one's about 25 or 50 feet. And it sends an EM pulse to the end and to these probe links, okay? So these probe tips, these metal probe tips that we have. And it sends an EM pulse there. And that EM pulse is then reflected back, and then we pick up the changes in that pulse that's coming back. And that gives us an idea of what our soil moisture or volumetric water content percent looks like. And now that one's been around for years and years and years. And actually it was used initially just to kind of find out if there was breaks in any lines. And so that's kind of the technology they use. Well, they've introduced a new updated version of a TDR probe, and this is called the Acclimate probe, and it has all of the guts of that sensor material in the head of the probe, and it does a fantastic job. It's a low-cost probe. This one is really expensive because of the cabling and some of the technology that's involved in it, as well as the data logger and some of those pieces that are necessary for that one. But this one, this is one of the higher end probes that we have. But all of these, they do a pretty decent job, but they're impacted by salinity. Salinity makes a large impact on whether or not these probes work that well as temperature. And texture is another thing. So if we have shrink swell clays, that's not a good thing, especially for these probes that you put in the ground. These are these profiling probes, as well as the DACOM probe I didn't talk to you a little bit about, but that's another capacitance probe. If I don't have good soil contact, it just doesn't work, okay? These things don't work at all. And if we have high EC values, they don't work that well either. So my electrical conductivity, if there's too much salt in my soil, it's just not going to work that well. The one way to get out of this is to produce a capacitance or a TDR probe that is at a higher frequency. So when I run at a higher frequency, and basically what I'm saying is I'm sampling it multiple times per second, okay? So these things, they sample it multiple times per second. They're like 70 hertz or 70 gigahertz, I think, something like that. Really high frequency, okay? And that helps mitigate some of the problems with salinity. So then if I get up to about 8 decisiemens per meter, which is really high salinity, anything above that, then we're going to still have some problems with these TDR probes as well as the capacitance probes. But below that, it's not so bad. So that's going to tell you how much water I have in my soil profile, which is great, right? I have these probes out there, I hand sample, or I use my shovel or my Dutch auger, and I'm sampling, and it's going to tell me which my volumetric water content percent is. So I have an idea. This is great. That's what I want to know, right? Well, yes and no. It's a good value to have. It's great. But if I don't know what my potential is, my water potential is, then I'm going to have a problem out in the field, okay? So I need to know both my volumetric water content percent and my soil water potential. And these are a couple of devices that help you to measure soil water potential. Here's one that probably you've all seen if you've been in research for any period of time. This is a watermark sensor. It's a granular matrix sensor. It has gypsum at the top, and so there's 2 leads that go into there, and then it's surrounded by sand, okay? So there's sand, a surrounding sand matrix. And so what happens is you wet it up, and it'll tell you the potential of water within your soil profile. So what happens is if my soil is wet, what happens? I move from low to high potential, right? Or high to low potential, right? So I'm moving, I have more water here, and it's going to move into my soil probe, right? And it tells me, oh, okay, I have enough water in my soil profile. If it's dry, it's sucking water out of this, right? But the potential problem with this one is if I lose soil contact, which I do, then I'm going to have some problems with it, okay? And the range at which this operates is not ideal either. So this is another one that we can use out in the field, and this one is probably the most precise out of any of them, but again, it works from 0 to 90. I should probably give you an idea of what a normal is. So field capacity is around -10 to -33 kilopascals or centibars, and wilting points around -1500, okay? So if I put this out in the field, and this has a ceramic tip, and if I want to go down, this is about 18 centimeter to 2.5 or 2 foot probe, and I put this down in my soil, and what I have to do is fill it up with water, okay? And then if the surrounding soil is dry, what it's going to do, it's going to create a suction. We have this vacuum in here. It's going to create a suction. And on this dial, it'll tell me how much that suction is, right? It's going to tell me how much that suction is in the soil. So it's going to say, oh, okay, I'm a little drier here. That's not good for me. I need more water, right? The one problem with this is it works from a range from about 0 to 90. Or no, so it's 0 or around 0 to about 500, okay? So it's a reasonable range, but it's not the best range, okay? So all of these, pardon? Was there a question? I must have bumped it there. This one is from meter. This is has a ceramic head on it. This is the one, pardon me, that works from about 0 to about 500. And this one is about 0 to 90. And so then we break at about 90. And a lot of our crops, which I have on this diagram, have a, that's why I laminated it. I thought it might rain today. We have a plant range where it's comfortable. So each plant has a range where it's comfortable, okay? And it tells you, particularly for small grains, that's minus 40 to minus 50, okay? And then during ripening, we're all the way down to minus 800 to minus 1200. With corn, that's minus 50 during the vegetative period, and during ripening, we're minus 800 to 1200. So each crop has a different range where it's a little bit more comfortable for that crop, okay? And if you want to look at this, you're certainly welcome to. I don't know if you want to look, but you're welcome to pass it around. So now we know what volumetric water content we have, and we know how comfortable our crop is. Then we should have a pretty good picture, right? We should have a pretty good picture of, okay, if I put this in, a volumetric water content percent soil moisture sensor like a TDR or a capacitance sensor like this EC5 from meter, then I have a good idea which my volumetric water content percent is. And then if I use a Terrace 21 or a resistance probe like this watermark sensor, then I have a good idea of what that zone is where I want to keep my crop. And the reason we do that is our water release curves. And I think I have a picture of a water release curve here. And our soil water release curve, or a soil water characteristic curve, or a soil water retention curve, they're all the same thing. But if I had a volumetric water content percent, so if I only use this one, and I know my volumetric water content percent is 10, I'm saying, wow, I'm way too low. But with a sand, I'm basically at field capacity, right? Okay? With a loam, I'm at wilting point. I'm at minus 1500, okay? So that's why it's critical to have both. I have my volumetric water content percent, but I also have an idea of what my water potential looks like. So those are critical. Some people would rather just say, forget it. I don't want to use any of these. And a large majority of the producers we've worked with say, yeah, this is too much of a headache. I don't want to deal with any of this stuff. And so they go to what we call an ET-based method. And this is our kind of the flagship product that we have is our AIM, or Alberta Irrigation Management Model. And the Alberta Irrigation Management Model is based on ET. ET is evapotranspiration. For all of you that don't know, an evapotranspiration, basically evaporation and transpiration, we just pull them together. Well, there's many different methods to measure ET. We have a surface renewal method, and basically it's just high frequency measurement of temperature. And so that was developed in U of C Davis in Tule down in California, and they brought it back up here, and they've commercialized it. And I think CropX, if anybody's interested, CropX has a soil moisture probe, but they purchased Tule. And so they set it out in the field, and they give you real-time ET values with this particular system. And basically, like I said, it's a fine wire thermocouple, and it's at high frequency data recording, and then they give you a value of sensible heat, and then they convert that to latent heat, which is your ET. So sensible heat is just a change from from 1 degree to the next. Latent heat is a change of phase, so it's from liquid to vapor state, okay? So that's what they're looking for. They're looking for that LE value. We could also use an eddy covariance system. I think they have one over here at the demo farm, if I'm not mistaken. What we use is what's called the Bowen ratio. And the reason we use a Bowen ratio, we've used an eddy covariance system in the past, and we had one of the things that it has on there for instrumentation is a krypton hygrometer, and it basically just tells you the moisture in the air. But the windows on those krypton hygrometers, they scale because of the moisture that's applied through the pivot, and that causes all kinds of problems when we're trying to get reasonable readings. So we went back to the Bowen ratio, and we've seen pretty good results with that. So what we do is we go out to the field, we set up a Bowen ratio. So it could be in a crop like this, and actually I have it on a crop of peas this year. And what we generate is 15-minute ET data, okay? So we establish a signature of ET throughout the growing season, which we call a crop coefficient curve. This crop coefficient curve then goes back into our models. And then we multiply that crop coefficient curve by what's called an ET reference curve. And this ET reference it could be a Penman-Monteith model, Hargraves model, Priestley-Taylor model. We use a Penman-Monteith. And then we populate our models with this. And so during the growing season, we have an idea of how much your crop is using throughout the growing season. So we can give you a pretty accurate estimate of what this crop is going to be using at any time during the growing season without you having to go out there. We still suggest you go out there. I think it's critical that you go out there and use a probe just to test where your soil moisture is at. So you could have a backup soil moisture probe if you wanted, but those are kind of the products that we have. Lastly, I kind of wanted to touch on some of the new products that are coming out. We did some work a number of years ago, I think back in 2019, 2020, with Skaha. It's a Canadian company, and they're putting out microwave sensors, okay? Microwave sensors, what they're doing is just picking out the natural radiation that's emitted from the soil. And then they try to estimate what your volume of soil moisture is. You can mount it on your pivot. There's no signal attenuation from whenever your pivot is operating, so you don't have to worry about that. One issue they have is maybe with some canopy interference, but I think they're working through that. So that's one new one. And then there's also a gamma ray system. And again, that's another passive sensor. The amount of radionucleotides that are coming out of the soil. And I think basically it's potassium, and there's a couple other ones that are thorium, I think is another one. Anyway, whatever's being released from the soil, and they use that as a surrogate for a volumetric water content percent. So that's kind of all of the things that are happening with regards to soil moisture at this current stage. And I guess with that, I'll probably take some questions, because I wanted to leave time for questions. Sure, go ahead.
Is there a difference between a soil moisture probe and a soil moisture sensor? Sometimes you see different, they're called different things.
They are called different things. Soil moisture probe, normally a soil moisture probe is something that goes down into the soil and you take a sample, a physical sample of that soil. So that would be a probe, right? Sometimes people will confuse the two. Yeah. They would call them, I'm using a soil moisture probe, saying leaving it in the soil and stasis and taking a reading from that. But so it just depends. You probably should get some clarification on that, but yeah. Most of the time they're talking about the same thing, but they're kind of mixed up.
And then the sensors that you have here, are most of these, they stay in the field, or are they mostly mobile? Or?
That was the one issue that we had with this.
Do you mind repeating the question, sorry?
Oh, yes, sure. What's the difference between a probe and a sensor? But you got the follow-up, right? Okay, good. Some of these you can leave in the field. This one, like I said, it's built to be left in the field, but we've noticed the repeatability is terrible. So I can go out there, take it out, put it back in, and get a different reading. And that's not what you want, right? That's not a good thing. They might have improved that over a period of time, but I know when we did it, we weren't very happy with it. A neutron probe is something I don't have here because we don't have one anymore, but we used to. And we use it in a research base. And it has a larger soil volume that it measures from. It's about the size of a basketball in diameter. And that, if I put in an access tube, and aluminum basically is nothing. It's basically, well, that probe itself wouldn't see that aluminum, okay? So I'd put an aluminum access tube in, and then I would send the probe down, and that probe then would give me a reading. And that reading, basically, it's a neutron source. Cesium, beryllium, I believe, is the neutron source that they normally use. And basically what it sends out is fast neutrons, okay? These really fast neutrons. And then they're thermalized or slowed down by the waters. And the water has the highest hydrogen concentration within the soil profile. So what it does is slows those down. So we're around 6,000 miles per second is how fast these things are coming off, those fast neutrons. And then it comes back at about 1.6 miles per second, okay? So those are the slow ones that we're recording. And that, if you go back in and again and again and again, it's repeatable, it's good data, okay? So that's kind of the standard for soil moisture.
Kind of for research, would you say, Len?
Right, you have to have a special license to do it. And the cost is really expensive. It's about $12,000 for a neutron probe, okay? So there's some drawbacks, absolutely, yeah. But if you're in the research side of things, it's great. Yes, please, yeah.
How do you get access to this AIM model?
How do you get access to the AIM model? The AIM model is free of charge on the ACES website. So if you go to the GOA website and you search AIM, Alberta Irrigation Management Model, and then ACES, ACIS, you'll find it there. There's a couple other tools. We have a mobile app, and the mobile app is housed by Washington State University. They use our crop coefficients and our MET stations. And so, and you have to lie about your zip code if you're, yes. Say, yeah, you're in Billings, Montana or something like that. But it does work really well. A lot of people that have used it are really happy with it. The reason we went there is because we didn't have the funding to do it internally, so they were willing to house it for us, so that's what we've used with them. And then there's something else called Irricast that's available online at that same ACES website. And that gives you a 5-day window of crop water use. So if you're interested, you can use something like that too.
So, if you explain how the Irricast works, like it's a really nice, great tool for kind of people introducing, but just if you can kind of describe what that does, you put in your planting data.
Sure,
yeah.
Right, yeah, thanks. So Irricast, the model itself, if you don't want to do a lot of work, this is one thing. Actually, it was a producer in Rosemary. He'd never used any modeling tool before. He used Irricast. He said he had his best canola crop that he's ever had. And he was really, really happy with it. So basically, it has the same guts as AIM. So it's based on that crop coefficient curve that I talked about. And you put in your seeding date, your crop type, and you check your local MET station, and then it just populates the previous 5 days, or I think it's the previous 5 days, your previous 5 days of ET, okay? And then it gives you a total, and then it tells you what your deficit is based on whatever you've added and what's going to be used in the next 5 days. So it gives you a bit of a forecast.
Kind of predicts it. Does it predict the weather, or just predicts what the crop would use?
It just predicts what the crop would use moving forward.
Brave if you think.
Yeah, no, we're not doing that.
How does the shovel and
Yeah.
hand method work?
How does the shovel and hand method? You want to come out and do it? No? No? Oh, there's data on it. Yeah, I would look online if you want, but you just dig down. If you're digging down, you wet up that sample, and then you beat it out between your thumb and your forefinger. And based on the ribbon that you get, you can kind of tell what your texture is. And based on the ball that you get, you can tell how much soil moisture. So if I have a sandy soil and it's over 70%, it'll stain my hand, okay? And it'll make it won't make a great ball, but it'll make a little bit of a ball. but anything above 70% will stay in your hand, okay? And then beating, of course, your clay is going to live a longer ribbon than, say, a sandy soil, right? But yeah, you can look on that, and there's lots of stuff on that stuff. I won't go through all of that today, but yeah. What is the best way? Yeah. What is the best way? You know what? Again, when guys come to me and ask about soil moistures, we had lots of buy-in at the beginning for a lot of these probes, and guys just throw them on the shelf after a couple of years, if not the first year. So I would say, based on that information, I would say modeling and go out and test your fields every couple of weeks.
I've
Yeah.
worn out 3 Dutch augers in my career so far.
That's how I do it
The
too.
only method I use is Michelle's, and that's called the probe method.
Yeah,
And it works very, very well.
it works great. Yeah,
Especially when you're doing in multiple areas and multiple soil types and everything else. This is one
Absolutely.
issue that probe I used. Different soil types, you got completely different, the numbers weren't consistent. So.
no, that's right. Yeah. Oh boy, maybe I'll give you the mic to repeat it. I don't know.
That wasn't that valuable.
No, come on, George. Yeah. He was just wondering what would the best method be. He said, based on his experience, it was the Dutch auger. Just going out multiple sites. Again, if I take a soil sample here and I say this is representative of my whole field, is it representative of my whole field? Well, no, right? It's not. It's representative of this little area here, right? And so if I'm looking here, look at my location. There's lows there, there's highs here. I'm sure the soil texture is different from here to here. So it's ideal for you to go out, sample different locations, go back to one, use that as your baseline. That's what I do when I go out and do fields. I do multiple check sites. I go back, then I know where my baseline is at the beginning of the year. And then I base all my information on this one because I know what everything else was like, okay? And then I set up my model, and then it predicts for me over a period of time. And then I go back out every 2 weeks just to make sure I'm verifying that model, okay?
So Len, on that note, there's a lot of commercial products that are available, and they tend to be just one probe.
Yeah.
But yet, in all honesty, they're becoming more and more successful. They're expensive. I'm concerned about that myself, but they are proliferating right now at this point. In your experience so far, how are we at getting more of a network? Because I think it's more of a connectivity, like a telematics issue that you can only have, because they'll sell you the one that you can log into with your phone, but as soon as you want a network of them, it's not possible. Have we made any progress in that side of things, like the radio frequency or anything along that lines?
Yeah. Some people say that LoRaN network that's coming out, that's potentially going to be the solution for that.
That's cost effective?
Well, yeah, cost effective, I don't know. And it's only as good as the probe itself and the information you get from it, right? Right? I don't know, a lot of people will say, oh, okay, I need about 30 sensors out in this field. I need 20, I need 5, I need whatever. And if you're not going to use the data, or the data isn't valuable for you, then, or you don't even know what the data means. Like some of the probes that we've had in the past, or the soil moisture sensors, pardon me. Soil moisture sensors that we've had in the past, we've set up in the field, and it gives you a volumetric water content %. You're like, well, that means nothing. Like great, yeah. Like I just mentioned, that soil water release curve that I was talking about, right? 10% at sand is what? Field capacity. 10% of a loam is what? Wilting point. So 10% means nothing. Like it means nothing, right? So unless I can make some modifications within that soil or that platform, it's not going to benefit me. Okay? So I think that's changing. I think people are realizing whenever they release these projects that's improving. And I think some of the cellular connection, maybe a LoRaN system will be better for telemetry. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
So the AIM model and the irrigation scheduler and some of the other products actually tell you how much
much water you need to restore it to where the crop is happy, rather than giving you the tensiometer number before that.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So
That's
for
a good
most
question.
producers, I think prefer the volume of what you need to restore order, not what percentage am I at, right?
So Michelle asked there, the one thing that AIM and other products like that tell you is how much water am I going to replace. So my ET, whatever I've used, that evapotranspiration value comes in millimeters. Whatever I've used in millimeters, it's going to say, I want you to replace that in millimeters. So it gives you a value as opposed to a number, like you said. So water potential, that's just a value. It's a number, right? In kilopascals or centibars or bars or whatever you want. And it just gives you a number. So if I don't know what, I don't have a spreadsheet like that, it shows me exactly where my crop is supposed to be. It's just a number. The same thing with volumetric water content percent. That's just a number, okay?
Part of why we invited you here is the fact that we were in a water restriction,
Yeah.
even though we've been getting rain and we're luckily getting St. Mary's filled, thanks to Montana.
Yeah, thanks.
But when it comes to sort of allocating water on any given farm,
Yeah.
and you want to sort of maximize a reduced allotment, what would be your approach to figuring out what would be sort of the best economic bang for your buck in distributing your water? And do we need to do more work along that front? Like if we're predicting future restrictions, do we need to do a better job? And is even AIM up to date enough? Because I was reading through Rod Bennett's paper that he put together, and there's some pretty old data in there.
There is. And we are updating our crop coefficients. Again, I'm just working on peas, and we have peas in there right now, but I'm doing a new one on that. So every year I have the Bowen ratio out in the field, and I'm developing a crop coefficient for whatever crop I'm working on. As for what you do in a drought situation and how you allocate land, Ross McKenzie released, it was an article maybe in March of this year. I can't remember, something like that. Anyway, he had a great suggestion, and one of it was, let's look at the crop mix that you're going to seed in the next year and decide on, okay, which crops are using the most water, right? So if I'm going to seed alfalfa through all my land, it's probably not the wisest decision I'm going to make, especially if it's forage alfalfa, right? It's because it's the highest crop water user that you're going to find, right? You're around 600 to 700 millimeters a year. That's not ideal if you're in a drought situation. So then you decide, okay, maybe we'll get rid of alfalfa and we'll put it into peas. Peas is shallow rooted. That's probably a good idea. It fixes nitrogen. That's not such a bad idea either. And it's got a shorter growing season, and it uses around 300, 350 mils a year, okay? So it's not using a lot of water. And then you look at that allocation that I have. So if I have, say, 15 inches, right, or 12 inches, or whatever your district sets, then you look through all the fields that you have. You have an idea of how much water they're going to use over a growing season, because if you look, we have a lot of information on that. It'll tell you how much water each crop is going to use, and if you're a producer, you already know that, right? So I have an idea what it's going to use, and then I also know what my system is. My system, that's very important, because you're not going to put it on 100%, right? If I say I'm going to put 15 inches down, I'm going to get 80% of that, or 85% of that, so 20% of that. Yeah, understand that. And then you also, your allocation. So my allocation isn't 100%, it's whatever my system can put on. So if my allocation is 15 and I get an 80% efficient system, that's 12 inches, right? So that drops down. And then that'll give you an idea of how much you're going to use throughout the growing season. Just plan it out. That's what I would suggest. Just plan it out and then say, okay, at the end, my high value crops are my potatoes. I'm not going to short them. I might short my wheat. And when can I short my wheat? Well, I can't short my wheat at tillering, but I can short it at maturity. And there's techniques out there to help you through that. So.
there's another factor that comes into play, and that is how the district measures your water use. They don't base it on what you set your pivot at. It's
Right.
based on when you start your pivot, when you shut your pivot off, what day.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you want to play it properly, you should probably start your pivot at 1 o'clock in the morning and run it for 2 days. If you started at 6 o'clock at night and run it over 3 days, you're going to be charged for more water than you run it for 2 days. That's just the way they measure. So that's all. I don't
There's
know all of
gaming.
them. Some of them do that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's a good point. I didn't know that. Okay. All right. I don't know. Yeah. Sure.
General question. I know there's talk about allocation, water allocation in this area.
Yep.
How much irrigation? How many more irrigated acres are there now than there were 5 years ago? And what's the district plan for the next 5 years? Because I know there's significant plans put in place for irrigation.
Oh, there is. The allocations are fixed, right? Like the basin is closed. Our allocations are our allocations. Each district gets their own allocation. They are grandfathered in, and what they're building on is the efficiencies that they gained over time. Okay, so those efficiencies, because of low pressure drops, because of subsurface drip irrigation, we're allowed to expand more acres because we still have that same allotment. It's just that that allocation is now, we're working at on the benefit of the research we've done over the years and the efficiencies that we gain over the years, and so they're expanding to move up to that allotment again. Okay? Yeah, go ahead.
And another comment on that is
Sure.
there's a lot of investment into turning the canals into pipelines because that's where a lot
Right,
of your loss
right.
is. So there's a ton of investment right now into that, and
Yeah.
that's another.
That, I don't know if everybody heard that, but a lot of the canals that you've seen around these districts, they're being put into pipelines. And the reason they're put into pipelines is evaporative losses, right? So the evaporative losses within the system is being reduced because of that. Although we're adding more storage, there's evaporative losses there, but it's not the same, right? We're trying to reduce that evaporative loss. So we're trying to gain those efficiencies throughout the whole system, not just on farm, but off farm as well, that delivery side of things.
Do you also see efficiencies in like newer varieties of crops that are using water slightly less?
Yeah, there's. I don't know if the efficiencies are big, but you'll see some improvement on them. Yeah, they're not going to be massive, but they'll be there a little bit. Yeah, those newer varieties. There's certain techniques that you can use. It's partial root zone drying is one. And partial root zone drying has been used in the citrus industry for a number of years. And basically what they do is they target one area of the root zone, and then they'll water it for 1 week, and then they target the other area of the root zone and water it for 1 week. And what it does is there's some plant hormone, okay, called ABA, and that plant hormone sends a signal to the radial parts of that plant that I'm in drought, okay? And so what it does is it reduces your leaf size. It also closes your stomatas to a certain degree, but it won't limit photosynthesis, which is good, okay? So they've noted worldwide that that's a benefit for a lot of people. So I haven't seen a lot of research done in this area.
We have one at the university.
You have one at the university,
Yeah,
okay?
there's one with potato. We've been measuring water use efficiency, and there is differences between varieties, not in the way the plant loses water, but in the allocation between shoots and underground. And we don't get paid for shoots, so if we find varieties that allocate to underground mass, then you're going to get more yield for the same amount of water.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, great.
Yeah. So what do you use?
What
When
do I
you coach
use?
People, what do you use? Yeah.
I use
AIM.
AIM. Yeah, I use AIM.
And a Dutch auger.
Yeah, and a Dutch auger. Yeah, that's what I use.
Well, thank you very much, Len.
Yeah, you're
I
welcome.
have a gift for
Oh,
you.
thank you. I appreciate that.
And Adrian Seeds has a door prize. If there's one big takeaway that you want the audience to take home with them, feel free to ask a quizzing question.
Oh, a quizzing question.
And
That's
whoever
great.
has the correct answer will get what looks like a 6-pack and battery from AJM Seeds.
Oh man, should I make it harder? Or really easy, right? Yeah.
Hard for the hard ciders.
Hard for the hard ciders. What does soil water potential measure?
There you go. That's a good one.
The comfort zone of the plant. Water.
Perfect, George.
Right in time for Canada Day.